Welcome, my dears. I'm so glad that you've come. May I offer you tea, a cream sherry? Please make yourselves comfortable. Allow me to tell you my story. It begins in a halcyon time, all but lost to us. The ending's the sunset of decades devoted entirely to beauty. But beauty's no longer in fashion. No one to summon it, nothing to herald it. No one remembers now what was accomplished by those giants, American masters, composers Horatio Parker, Edward MacDowell, John Payne, Arthur Foote, and George Chadwick. And the woman whom Chadwick called one of the boys, that was me, Amy Beach. I was born Amy Marcy Cheney in West Henniker, not long after President Lincoln was shot. Papa and Grandfather Cheney were occupied running the sawmill. Beside the Kentucook, our farmhouse stood peaceful and filled with the music that Mama and Grandmother Cheney would sing as they paced in the parlor to rock me to sleep, while, babe though I was, I accompanied their every melody, humming the alto lines, perfectly pitched. And I saw, unbeknownst to them, colors exploding from each sung key, a magical gift, that pairing of color and music. For me, yellow was E, and for A flat, a blue. G and A, red and green. The sharps were all black as the thunderclaps chasing me under the sheets. Loud noises alarmed me. I was a sensitive child. When rain fell like tears on the window glass, I wept as well. Melodies crowded my mind like the daisies that danced in the meadow wind. I wanted nothing so much as to play the piano and hear them aloud. But Mama forbade it and withheld the one happiness dear to my heart. Teaching me, she believed, I must bend to God's will and to hers. So I fashioned a keyboard of wood and pretended at playing my songs. Till one day, on a visit from San Francisco, my Aunt Frances, we called her Aunt Frank, stood me up on a hassock beside her and placed my small hands on the keys, much to my mother's chagrin. Oh, the joy of it! I played the harmony to Aunt's melodies. From then on, nothing could stop me, and finally Mama gave in. Accomplished musician herself, she became my first teacher. Thus, at 4 years of age, I began my life's passion, my service to music, the soul of beauty. We moved down to Boston. I studied piano and schoolwork with Mama. She wrote down a list of the music I played by the time I was 5, including the works of Beethoven and Strauss. That summer at my grandfather's farm, I composed waltzes as presents for Mama. There was no piano. I carried them back in my mind all the way home to Boston, as carefully as eggs in a basket. At Sunday school, I gave recitals and pestered my parents to let me perform on the concert stage. I loved the limelight. But soon came the managers jostling each other with offers of contracts. Immediately, Mama and Papa withdrew me from playing in public. Still, Mama did realize she taught me as much as she herself could. It was time I continued my musical studies professionally. After auditions with some of the city's leading musicians, eventually Maestro Parabo was chosen to teach me. and for 8 years I flourished under the warm sun of his attention. Word of my prodigy spread through the city. Even the poet Longfellow knew my work. I set his poem, The Rainy Day, to music and gave it to Aunt Frank as a gift. It was my first published work. Mr. Longfellow even suggested my parents should take me to Europe to learn from the masters, but they wouldn't hear of it. I was too delicate. I was 10 when we set out, my mother and I, to San Francisco by rail for a year with Aunt Frank, Uncle Lyman, and Ethel, my cousin, my playmate. The photos all show me in velvet with ribbons and lace, coiffed in the latest style. Quite the young lady. And it seems there wasn't a moment when Aunt wouldn't leave off her chores to make time for us to play duets and sing. Things we did together, I treasure the day that I stole from the birds. A poet in Berkeley had heard that I was the lucky possessor of absolute pitch, and he needed my skills for a project of his. Aunt Frank and I crossed on the ferry to meet him. Amid wild spring flowers, we settled ourselves behind a stone wall, and with pencil and paper, I took down their airs, more than 20 in all. My piano and I have conversed with the birds ever since. In fact, all my life, I've been cradled and wrapped in the music of nature. Boston, I pined for the sociable San Francisco life I had tasted. So imagine my joy when my parents announced they'd enrolled me in school, Mr. Whittemore's school. I enjoyed mathematics and science, and oh, the companionship, finally, of girls my own age. I had friends. They invited me into their club, the Attic Club. Saturday mornings, we'd meet to recite our stories and poems. It was all very serious. We paid dues, kept attendance in minutes, and oh, there were rules. Unnecessary talking is prohibited. Every continued story must be finished. No boys. I have to confess that I was not as accomplished a writer as they, but at least I could offer up tunes on the parlor piano. One of our number, Miss Eloise Talbot, remarked on it many years later. One of our happiest memories is of the music which filled our rooms when we could persuade Amy to play for us at the close of the meeting. She was studying hard at the time, and our club was one of her few relaxations. She wrote interesting stories, too. Of course, we went to her debut in the music hall and sat in an enchanted row as she, with 2 heavy plaits of hair hanging down her back, sat at the great piano, dealing with it already with a master's hand. Yes, my debut at 16 with a symphony orchestra. I can only compare the sensation I felt to the thrill of a driver who holds in his hands the reins that control a glorious pair of spirited horses. My life is beginning, I thought, and it was. No more school, no more attic club, nothing from then on but music and all that went with it. The elegant gowns, the applause and the flowers, nothing but practice and playing the music I loved to an audience. till the day I became Mrs. Beach. I imagine that anyone might look askance at an 18-year-old who gladly agreed to marry a man more than twice her age. But bear in mind, those were the times when a young woman's parents would have liked nothing more than to see their child wed to a prominent surgeon, a pillar of Boston society, amateur painter and poet. Patron and lover of music, Dr. H.H.A. Beach was a widower. I think that he saw in me years of companionship and blossoming promise. I loved him, yes, and I was content with my new life. Well, for the most part. Indeed, our mansion on Commonwealth Avenue delighted and charmed me. I was eager to learn from the servants the way to choose linens and china, plan a meal, and receive Henry's colleagues for dinner or tea. Henry and I hosted lectures and musical gatherings, and often I played piano. So it was with no small degree of reluctance that I accepted his wish that I bow to propriety and abandon my professional career as pianist. Steeped in quaint notions of proper behavior becoming a married woman, which certainly did not include displaying oneself on a stage, Henry would only accede to one public recital a year with proceeds to benefit charity. Mama and Papa agreed. Still, I continued to play. Most evenings we entertained what seemed like all of the city of Boston's artistic elite. Meantime, Henry insisted my true calling lay in my work as composer. To encourage me, he furnished an elegant music room, filled it with books and manuscripts, guaranteed silence, and gave me a beautiful cat. I spent many hours a day by myself copying music scores, translating textbooks to deepen my knowledge of structure and form. It took just 1 year of harmony study for Mama and Henry agreed that a teacher would only corrupt my particular talents. They alone were my mentors and critics. So I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote. Ever have heard from me had I not embarked on this new life? It was terribly difficult, often so lonely. Would I counsel aspiring composers to learn as I did? I don't know. I don't think so. But from the vantage of these 50 years, I can only but wonder. Be that as it may, before I was 30, I'd written a mass, countless songs, chamber works, and the chorus Festival Jubilate that opened the Women's Pavilion at Chicago's Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair. The year was 1892. Dr. Beach and I went there for the ceremonies. Even today, I recall with astonishment all of the wonderments. The magnificent Ferris wheel, whirling 1,000 riders aloft. There on display for the first time, picture postcards and Cracker Jacks, ice cream cones, hamburger, soda with bubbles, and so many clever inventions by women, sewing and laundry machines. Why, a dishwashing machine won the highest award at the fair. Dr. Beach and I strolled through the brilliant white city with waterways threading the parks and lagoons. Everything used electricity. Electric cars, electric boats, even the sidewalks, electric. My, but the world was transforming itself in a rush. Later that summer, at the Women's Musical Congress, I premiered my romance. Maud Powell herself, to whom I dedicated it, was right there beside me on stage. Her violin fairly wept. The audience was there in the thousands to hear us. They cheered to be echoed and urged us to play it again. Moments like those kept my longings alive. You know that I've always considered myself a pianist first. Now, Dvorak had recently come to America, widely expounding the view that composers should work with American themes. Henry, the tender tyrant, convinced me to undertake writing a symphony, drawing on sources that spoke of my personal heritage. For 2 years, I labored in virtual solitude, writing my Gaelic. The Boston Symphony premiered the work. I thought of Aunt Frank and how she'd insisted I play the piano. I thought of my mother, her careful concern for my general welfare. I thought of the Attic Club, friends of my youth and first audience, and my husband, my muse, as I sat at the gleaming piano and offered my soul on the altar of music and beauty. The audience loved it. The critics were kind. But the words that I treasure still came in a note from my dear friend, the composer George Chadwick. I've kept it all these years. I want you to know how much Mr. Parker and I enjoyed your symphony on Saturday evening. It is full of fine things, melodically, harmonically, and orchestrally, and mighty well built besides. I always feel a small thrill of pride myself whenever I hear a fine work by any one of us, and as such, you will have to be counted in, whether you will or not. One of the boys. You'll have to forgive Mr. Chadwick his outdated notions, but much as my feminist suffragist sisters might take umbrage at them, fact was, he and his colleagues all championed me and my music, and played it in churches and concert halls throughout New England, keeping my name and my work alive in the repertoire. I was becoming quite successful. The proceeds from one of my songs, Ecstasy, the one I'd written words and music to Henry, even purchased 5 acres of land on Cape Cod in Centerville. Henry built us a cottage around the piano. We called it the Pines. There, we both did our own work, close to the ocean and uninterrupted. It was during that time that dear Papa fell ill and passed away. Mama moved into our Commonwealth Avenue home, taking charge of the household, the servants, the cleaning, the shopping, the planning. She was determined that nothing should come between me and my music. But alas, she loved nothing more than to sit in the wing chair and listen to me as I practiced. So you can imagine the patience it took to ignore her interruptions. I'd begun to compose a concerto for piano and orchestra. Mother and Henry were critics more stern and demanding than those in New York or Boston. But still, I chafed. Did they hear it? The chords of my innermost longings, my need to return to performing? Did they sense I made a piano concerto so difficult no one could readily play it but I? Then the accident. Henry suffered a fall, but he was recovering well. Suddenly, the abscess, the fever. His doctor worked valiantly. Nevertheless, the unthinkable. Henry died. After the funeral, Mama and I spent some time at the cottage. She was growing so frail. The year had not turned before she too was gone. Mama and Henry both gone. 2 blows upending my life. I was stopped. Even the music I loved wrung my heart. What now? Slowly I turned to my friends, the girls of my youth, my wonderful cousins, the women who sang my art songs and played my music. They were steadfast and loving. They pulled me from darkness and silence. But now I needed to make my own living with the skills I possessed. Finally, my publisher's urging convinced me on my 44th birthday, September 5th, 1911. I boarded the liner with Marcella Kraft, the brilliant soprano and pianist, boldly embarked on a musical tour of the continent. I hadn't seen myself as an adventurer, but how wrong I was. Under that vast sky, surrounded by ocean, I knew I'd outgrown the elegant, comfortable shell of my life. The sea was the highway I'd traveled to cities I'd only encountered in books. And at last, on the stages of Europe, I was composer and pianist both. Germany welcomed me, Italy nourished me. All across Europe, the critics were warm in their praise of my music. My spirit revived. From the distance of years, it hardly seems real, that golden time. I wrote in a letter, I belong to a happy period that never came again. The world I knew has passed, the music-loving world of Berlin, Hamburg, Leipzig, and Dresden. For my life at that time, and for the part I was permitted to play in that world, I am grateful. In September 1914, when rumors of war put an end to the tour, I sailed back, but not backwards. A new Amy Beach disembarked in America. My second career commenced. I traveled from Boston to Pittsburgh, New York, Kansas City, Chicago, and Portland, and soon California was calling me west again. The first stop was Riverside. Of all the events designed in our honor, the most unforgettable came on a mountaintop at dawn, Easter Sunday, as thousands of worshipers gathered with trumpets announcing the sun, and Marcella sang "The Years of the Spring," and I played accompaniment. For months, I toured cities throughout the West, then returned to New Hampshire with Aunt Frank and Cousin Ethel. Ethel became an art teacher, and with Frank settled into our Hillsborough house, I returned to its homely embrace and the life of the small town after each touring engagement. In the year 1920, I suffered 2 more terrible losses. My dear cousin Ethel died, and the man I called A in my diary, I can name him now, Arthur Hyde. Nobody knew how I cherished him. Nobody fathomed my grief, my despair. Who would have known when I met him at Boston's Emmanuel Church, playing his beautiful settings of my choral works? Who would have known when he moved to St. Bartholomew's Church in New York, taking my music to play on the organ and sing? Did I mention he had the voice of an angel? Who would have guessed that in 1918 he would heed the call to war, leave for France, and return with his lungs seared by mustard gas, his fine voice silenced? He was never the same. On a dark day in winter, I lost him to influenza. In the throes of such sorrow, would I have persisted without Marian McDowell? Friends from our Boston days, I'd stood with her through her husband's last illness and helped her establish an artist retreat in his honor. There, in the bird-echoing woods of her Peterborough colony, from an innermost silence, I drew my memories and pain and transformed them. Memories make life beautiful. Forgetfulness makes it possible. Into my solitude, the hermit thrush came and dictated his song to me. My heart opened up once again to the balm and the beauty of music. Evenings at McDowell, I shared in the laughter and games with the playwrights and poets and artists whom Marian nurtured. I became quite adept at billiards. I even sat for one of the sculptors. Imagine a bust of me by Bashka Peff. She's the artist who crafted the Maine Sailors and Soldiers War Memorial in Kittery. I spent precious weeks at McDowell Colony every June and September thereafter. I wrote in my journal, in that magic environment, I can truly live with what I create. I wintered in Hillsborough, my ancestral home. There were long summer days on the porch at the Pines on Cape Cod. Lillian Buxbaum, my Boston soprano and Centerville neighbor, would ready the house, then ferry me to and fro. If I hadn't sequestered myself several hours a day to compose, I'd have happily spent every soft summer hour on the beach or the porch of the cottage with friends. As it was, I had both. And throughout it all, I performed countrywide. The months touring here and in Europe convinced me I needed much more of the fire that only great cities ignite. By then, Frank was gone, and with her the reason I'd stayed in New Hampshire. I decided to move to a studio in New York City. At the American Women's Association, I had a living room with a window that looked out on the Hudson. Downstairs there were parlors, a library, restaurant, and my friends saw to it I rarely took dinner alone. You know, all my life I've depended on others to tend to the daily chores, the bane of the artist. My career as composer and pianist made possible thus. I can't drive. I can't cook. I don't sew. My talents are distressingly few. For every meal I eat, every ironed bed sheet and hemmed gown, I give thanks. To Mama and Henry and Ethel and Frank, cousins Mabel and Fanny, Amy Brigham, one of the girls from the Attic Club days, Marion McDowell, Marcella and Lillian and Ruth, the voices of my songs, all my ports in the storms of this difficult world. In turn, I take many girls and young women under my wing. Childless by choice, I've adopted a passel of musical children. David McKinley Williams and Ruth Schaffner are the closest I have now to family. Appointed to fill Arthur's place at St. Bart's, David makes much of my work, and he plays it with brilliance. Ours is a singular friendship. I treasure and love him, like a son. Ruth Schaffner, his soloist, sings with remarkable power and warmth. She is the daughter I never had, my constant companion these days. I don't know what I'd do without her. Ruth and I give recitals together. We've done hundreds by now. Why, Mrs. Roosevelt has had us perform at the White House. Twice. The photo she signed holds pride of place in my living room, though I'll certainly always continue to cast a Republican vote. My life's been a whirl these past years, what with travels to Europe and radio broadcasts, concerts, receptions, recitals, and lectures, and wonderful evenings with friends at the theater and symphony. Meantime, I'm still helping Marion. She's raising the funds to repair the terrible damage the '38 hurricane wreaked on McDowell. And of course I'm composing the new trio. Then, soon after the concert in Brooklyn, where the trio was warmly received, I fell ill. It's my heart, I'm afraid. The doctor forbids me to play the piano. Shades of my Henry. No longer can I spend those June weeks at McDowell. New York and Cape Cod are the poles of my life now. I have taken no formal farewell from public performances, nor do I intend to do so. But I face the fact that never again shall I be strong enough for it. The music goes on without me. I'm often asked about my place as a woman in American music. I said this to a young woman writing an article for a magazine. I have no special views at all about the success or non-success of women in any field. My work has always been judged from the beginning by work as such, not according to sex. I have always tried to do the best possible in my creative work. And as for the modern music so touted these days, I know it's 1944 and so much has changed since the war's end. Yet, I know I sound hopelessly old-fashioned, but I am convinced that a composer who has something to say must say it in a way people will listen to, or his works will lie in obscurity on dusty shelves. And of course, I still believe in beauty. I do not regret for a moment that I have devoted my whole life to it. But those are subjects for another day. I see it's getting late. I don't want to keep you. I'm so pleased you came. While you gather your coats, allow me to put a recording on the phonograph. The one of the wonderful Maud Powell playing my romance. You'll forgive me if I don't see you to the door. My hip has been aching lately. Remember the Chicago World's Fair? Thousands came to hear us. They cheered to the echo. Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Thank you for coming. And I'm here. If anybody wants to ask any questions, I will be Amy and answer them, or I'll be Marie Harris and answer them.
So in the beginning, you talked about her ability to see colors
Yeah.
with music. So how did that play out in her life as she got older?
Well, first of all, the way it was discovered, let me turn this off. My timing is still a work in progress.
Could you repeat the question?
Joyce, ask the question again.
Sure. Amy said in the beginning that she would see colors when she played music. So how as her work progressed into adulthood, how did that stay or change?
Well, at first, the way that her mother discovered that she had what is called synesthesia, that sounds triggered colors in her mind. This is not an associative thing. The sound made the color. What she would do when she was a little girl, like 3 years old, she'd say to her mother, who was quite the pianist herself, Mama, play the pink music or play the yellow music. And her mother thought that she meant the color of the sheet music on the piano. But she began to realize that it was the key that Amy was asking for. So it was the song that was in the key of G or the song that was in the key of A or whatever. So, but you know, how it affected her, it was odd. When she was a little girl, she hated the minor key. It was black for her. So if she misbehaved, and she was rather a pert little child, as her mother used to say, if she misbehaved, her mother would sit down at the piano and bang out something in the minor key, particularly Gottschalk's Last Hope, apparently. Until Amy was like this, saying, please, Mama, don't, I'll be good, I'll be good. I thought it was kind of a fascinating type of child abuse. You know? And I think that she was aware of it in her life, but I don't think, and I think this is true of many synesthetes, I don't think it had a one-to-one relationship to her music. She was simply, it just was. So I don't think, she never wrote that she purposely was playing a particular key because of the color that sprang up in her mind. And when I've talked to other synesthetes since, it's something that they have without necessarily being relating to it in some specific way. It's just there. If that answers your question, that's sort of all I know from what she said. Yeah. Yeah.
What is your background? Are you a historian or?
No, and I have no musical background either.
Oh.
I stumbled upon Amy in a roundabout way. In fact, discovered that she was born in New Hampshire. She was America's first female composer, and nobody in 2000, whenever I stumbled on her, 2002 or so, had ever heard of her from what I knew. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, she was feted all over the world. She was a household name. Her sheet music bought 5 acres of land on Cape Cod. That's a lot of sheet music, you know. And so I just took to learning about her, and I began to listen to her music, and I fell in love. And so then I developed this sort of monologue and performed it with live musicians for a number of years, and that's not happening right now. But when this beautiful exhibit, I hope you've all had a chance to have a quick look at it, and by the way, take that program with you. Yeah. When that exhibit was going to tour to libraries, the curator, Dale Valena, told libraries that it could come with me if they were interested. So that's the genesis of this particular iteration of my performance. Yeah, but I know I'm not a
Dale
historian.
Valena, the one lives on Bay Road?
Dale Valena, and she lives now in Portsmouth.
Oh,
She used to live out.
she used to live on Bay Road.
Yeah, yeah.
I lived in Bay Road.
Yeah.
You've also written a book about it, correct?
Well, I'm working on something. I haven't written a book about Amy, but I did write a children's book in which synesthesia was the theme. It was about a little girl, though, not Amy. Just an ordinary little girl. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
I have a picture of my grandmother in that same outfit. Where did you get it?
From Amy.
Where did you get it?
Amy gave it to me. It is. It does. It fits the bill, doesn't it? It's kind of
Yes,
interesting.
love the hat.
Yeah.
How the hat becomes you.
Stunning.
Yes.
Do you have any future events with the live music?
That I'm trying to put back together again, and it's not really up to me. It's up to the musicians and the North Country Chamber players. But I'd love up in Franconia, Sugar Hill.
Frank, oh, Sugar Hill.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something that they
Isn't
have
this
to do.
some sort of anniversary of?
It's the 150th anniversary of her birth.
There you go.
Yeah.
And let me tell you one quick thing. This is sort of interesting. There was a piece in the New York Times about her 150th, and there's apparently some really cool new CD that was put out because it was the 150th. But in general, the response of conductors to Amy's music, and this was most recently told to me by a woman who would like to be a guest conductor at the New Hampshire Symphony, and she proposed a particular program of music, and the executive director said, "We've already done Amy Beach." Can you imagine them saying, "We've already done Beethoven"? You know, I mean, it's just like we've already done Amy Beach. So she still, even though she was massively productive and incredibly talented, she still looked at as a kind of footnote that if you've done Amy Beach for the year or for the decade or whatever, you've done that. And it's
You're
frustrating.
obliged to do it, and your application's complete.
Yeah, exactly. And she's this footnote and not somebody whose music we want to bring out every single year. And she's written an opera, she's written a mass, she's written 150 art songs, and never mind all the concertos and sonatas and everything. So she deserves to be known better. Well, thanks.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's nice of you to come out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there some way that